Berlin, April 1945. The city was dying. Not suddenly, but in slow, shuddering breaths. Each sunrise revealed less of it. Streets, once alive with laughter and bicycles, now lay under a skin of ash. The air hung heavy with the scent of burning wood and oil. The war was almost over. But for those trapped inside Berlin, it didn't feel like victory or surrender. It felt like the end of the world. Among the broken stones and the drifting smoke were boys. Children, really, dressed in mismatched uniforms, carrying rifles that looked too large for their thin shoulders. They were the last soldiers of the Reich, the Volkssturm, young, frightened, and misled into believing they could defend what no longer existed. They had been raised on promises of destiny, of honor, of a Germany that would last 1,000 years. But that morning, with the thunder of Soviet artillery echoing through the ruins, those promises felt like ghosts. Lucas was 16. He had joined the Hitler Youth at 12, when patriotism was still something to be proud of, when flags still fluttered above classrooms and teachers spoke of greatness. He'd believed every word. But now, kneeling behind the carcass of a tram beside his friend Otto, he wondered what any of it had meant. Otto was 15, his cheeks still soft beneath the dirt. He clutched a rifle and muttered fragments of the Führer's last broadcast. Words about courage, about dying for the fatherland. Lucas listened, but only half-heartedly. The sound of explosions made the earth tremble beneath them. Dust fell from shattered windows like snow. He thought of his mother. He could still see her in the kitchen, flour on her hands, humming as she baked bread. He had told her he would make her proud. Now he wished he could tell her he was sorry. Night fell early that day, swallowed by smoke and fear. The boys took shelter in the basement of a ruined bakery. The smell of burnt sugar still clung to the walls. They shared a crust of old bread, passed between them like something sacred. Outside, artillery shells screamed through the dark. Otto tried to keep his voice steady. "Do you think we'll win?" he asked. Lucas didn't answer. He only looked at the cracks spreading across the ceiling and whispered, "I think it's already over." The next morning, Berlin was quieter, but not peaceful. Silence had become something dangerous. It meant the Soviets were closer. The boys crept through the streets, past tanks reduced to twisted metal, past the corpses of men who had once shouted orders. They were told to deliver a message, though none of them truly knew who it was for. The command posts had fallen, the officers were gone, and the maps no longer made sense. In the Tiergarten, they took cover beside a crumbled lion statue. Otto leaned against it, laughing nervously. "Maybe this one will protect us," he said. Lucas forced a smile. Moments later, a shell burst across the road. When the dust settled, Otto was gone. His helmet rolled to Lucas's feet, its inside stained red. He didn't cry. He couldn't. He sat there until the sky turned gray again. When he finally stood, Berlin was burning all around him, flames licking the edges of buildings, the roar of tanks blending with the screams of the wounded. For the first time, Lucas understood that there would be no miracle. The Reich wasn't collapsing because of its enemies. It was collapsing under the weight of its own lies. By nightfall, the surviving boys drifted together again, a dozen of them, lost and leaderless. They moved like shadows, avoiding both Soviets and what remained of their own soldiers. Some still wore their Hitler Youth armbands. Others had torn them off. They were no longer an army. They were children trying to survive the ruins of an idea. When the fighting stopped, Berlin was a graveyard. The air reeked of smoke and silence. Lucas walked among the rubble, numb and hollow. The radio played nothing but static now. He didn't know what day it was. He didn't even know if the war was officially over. He only knew that he was alive. And that Otto wasn't. Days passed without food, without direction. Lucas and a few others decided to head west. Rumors whispered that the Americans treated prisoners kindly, that they gave bread instead of bullets. It sounded like fantasy, but it was the only hope they had left. They walked through shattered villages, through fields where tanks lay like skeletons half buried in mud. They slept in barns, drank from puddles, and told each other stories they barely believed. One boy carried a tattered banner from the Hitler Youth. Another carried his little sister's doll. They were soldiers without a country, ghosts wandering through a landscape of ash. After days of walking, they saw it, a glow on the horizon, too steady to be fire. They approached cautiously, hands raised, their bodies trembling. From behind a pile of sandbags, a voice shouted in English. They froze. Then, slowly, a group of American soldiers stepped forward, rifles raised but not firing. One of them shouted, "Don't move!" "Hands up!" Lucas obeyed, his legs shaking. Then something strange happened. The Americans lowered their guns. One of them, a young man with a kind face, called out, "They're just kids." The soldiers exchanged uncertain looks. Moments later, a nurse appeared, her uniform dusty, her face tired but gentle. She spoke softly, in words Lucas didn't understand, but her tone was unmistakable. Calm, human, warm, she approached him, her hand outstretched, and took the rifle from his fingers. Then she handed him a cup of water. He stared at it for a long time. No one had handed him anything in months. He drank, and the taste of it, clean, cold, alive, made his throat tighten. The woman smiled faintly. "You're safe now," she said in slow, careful German. Lucas didn't know if he believed her, but for the first time in a long while, he wanted to. That night, the boys were taken to a temporary camp near Würzburg. It wasn't a prison, though the fences made it look like one. They were given blankets, food, and a place to sleep. For hours, Lucas couldn't stop eating. Every bite felt like waking from a nightmare. He kept glancing around, half expecting the kindness to vanish. The same nurse, her name tag read Andrews, came by with a lantern. Checking on them, when she reached Lucas, she paused. "Eat slowly," she said. "Your stomach's forgotten kindness." He looked up at her, unsure what to say. She smiled. "What's your name?" "Lucas," he whispered. She repeated it softly, as if memorizing it. "Good boy," she said. Those two words, so simple, so ordinary, hit him harder than any explosion. No one had called him that since before the war. For the first time in years, Lucas slept without fear. When he woke, sunlight was streaming through the tent. He could hear laughter, real laughter, from the other boys outside. He sat up slowly, feeling something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. Over the following weeks, the boys began to remember what it felt like to be human again. They helped the nurses carry supplies, fetched water, even built small tables from scrap wood. Every evening, Nurse Andrews would walk between the tents, talking softly with each of them, asking questions they barely knew how to answer. "What did you want to be before the war?" she asked Lucas once. He hesitated, staring at the floor. "A carpenter," he finally said. She smiled. "Then one day, you'll build something that lasts longer than any war." Her kindness unsettled him at first. He had been taught that enemies were monsters, that mercy was weakness. Yet here was this woman, an enemy by uniform, speaking to him as if he were someone worth saving. It didn't make sense, and maybe that's why it mattered so much. In the camp, there were no speeches, no salutes, no orders barked from fear, just people, tired, broken people, trying to remember how to live. The boys slowly began to talk about home, about mothers and sisters, about games they used to play before the uniforms. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Nurse Andrews gathered them under a canopy for a quiet meal. They sat on wooden crates, eating stew and bread that tasted faintly of smoke but felt like warmth. Lucas sat across from her, watching the way she smiled at every boy who spoke, as if she could see past their guilt and grime. When she poured milk into his cup, she said gently, "You remind me of my brother. He worries too much, too." Lucas frowned. unsure if she was teasing. She laughed softly, and for the first time, he found himself laughing too. The sound startled him. It had been so long since laughter had come easily. Later that night, as the boys lay in their tents, one of them began to cry quietly. Another whispered, "What's wrong?" "She called me son," the boy said. "I haven't heard that in years." Lucas rolled over, eyes open in the dark. After a pause, he murmured, "Maybe we all are. Now." There was silence after that. Not empty silence, but peaceful, full of something they hadn't felt in months. It wasn't victory. It was healing. Summer crept across the ruins of Germany, bringing with it strange new sounds. Birdsong instead of bombs, the hammering of reconstruction instead of artillery. One morning, the fences around the camp were taken down. The boys were moved to a re-education center, where teachers replaced officers, and textbooks replaced rifles. They were given pencils, notebooks, and questions they couldn't yet answer. Lucas took to carpentry, just as he had told Nurse Andrews. He found comfort in the rhythm of building, in turning broken wood into something whole again. Each nail, each plank, each measured line felt like an act of defiance against destruction. He didn't build monuments to heroes. He built chairs, tables, and window frames. Small things, useful things. He said that rebuilding the world had to start with what people touched every day. Every Sunday, he would take out the small notebook Nurse Andrews had given him. Inside, he wrote names not of generals or battles, but of people: Otto, his mother, Nurse Andrews. He filled page after page, as if by writing their names he could keep them from vanishing completely. At the back of the notebook, he wrote a single line: "Healing is remembering without hate." In the autumn of 1945, a rumor spread that many of the nurses and soldiers who had worked in the camps were being sent home. One morning, as the boys repaired the roof of a schoolhouse, an American Jeep pulled up outside. When Nurse Andrews stepped out, the sunlight hit her hair just right, and for a moment, the world didn't look so gray. Lucas ran down the steps, his heart pounding. He didn't know what to say. She smiled when she saw him. "You've grown," she said. "You look different." He shrugged, smiling shyly. "I build houses now." "That's a good thing to build," she said. "Houses give people reasons to stay." They stood there, surrounded by the faint sound of hammers and laughter. For a few moments, the war felt like something that had happened a lifetime ago. Then her driver called. It was time for her to leave. Lucas felt something tighten in his chest. "I never thanked you," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For treating me like a person." She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "Promise me something, Lucas. Don't let this war be the only thing that defines you." He nodded. "I'll try." She reached out, placed a hand on his cheek, and said, "That's all any of us can do." Then she turned and walked away. He watched until the Jeep disappeared into the distance, her figure swallowed by the horizon. He stood there a long time after she was gone. The years rolled on, quietly, as if the earth itself was trying to forget. Germany changed. The rubble turned to homes, the fear to silence, and then to songs. Lucas stayed in the small town near Frankfurt, building furniture and repairing roofs. He married, had children, and built a workshop filled with the smell of sawdust and sunlight. Sometimes he would catch himself humming, a habit from his mother, and stop, smiling faintly at the memory. But he never forgot the war. He didn't speak of it often. But when his son once asked, "Did you fight?" he paused, then said quietly, "No, I survived." One cold winter morning, long after his hair had turned gray, Lucas received a letter. It was postmarked from America. The handwriting was neat and familiar, though faint with age. He sat at his table and opened it with trembling hands. "Dear Lucas," it began, "I've thought of you often over the years. I hope you kept building, not just with wood, but with kindness. You kept your promise. The world feels a little quieter now, a little kinder, because of boys who learned to live instead of hate. Keep building. Lucas. Keep forgiving. That's how nations are healed. Anna Andrews. He sat there for a long while, reading it again and again. Then he folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the only other thing he still carried from the war, a faded photograph of his mother, smiling with flour on her hands. One had told him to be brave, the other had taught him to be kind. Between them lay the measure of his life. Years later, when Berlin had become a city of glass and steel again, Lucas visited it for the first time since the war. He walked through the Tiergarten where Otto had died. The lion statue was still there, repaired, standing tall, its surface smooth and cold beneath his hand. He closed his eyes and whispered, "You were right, Otto. The lion did protect us, just not the way we thought." He stayed until the church bells rang in the distance. They didn't sound like the bells of surrender anymore. They sounded like life. As he walked back toward the train station, he passed children playing near the river. They shouted and laughed, their voices echoing across the water. For a moment, he stopped and watched them. The way their joy seemed effortless, fearless. And he thought of the boys he had known, their laughter buried beneath the ruins, their names written in a notebook somewhere in his old workshop. He smiled, not in sadness but in gratitude, because in those children, in their noise and freedom, the world had finally healed the wound his generation had left behind. The sun was setting when the train pulled away from Berlin. Outside the window, the city glowed, rebuilt, reborn, restless. Lucas pressed his palm to the glass and whispered, "Goodbye." Not to the city, not even to the past, but to the boy he had once been. And somewhere deep inside him, that boy, the frightened child with the rifle and the dream of honor, finally found peace. The bells of Berlin rang again that evening, clear and steady, carrying over the rooftops. Not for war, not for victory, but for life itself. Because the greatest battles are not fought with weapons. They're fought in the quiet moments after the war, when forgiveness becomes the only way forward. And in that silence, among the ruins and the rebirth, the last boys of Berlin learned the truest lesson of all, that courage isn't dying for a cause.